Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, October 27th. And we begin tonight with a new report by Food Banks Canada, which indicates that governments could help the growing strain on food bank usage by providing more affordable and rent-assisted housing. The report, out today, says the number of people using food banks across the country rose to an all-time high in March to 1.5 million visits. It puts most of the blame on high inflation, skyrocketing food and housing costs, and low social assistance rates. Food insecurity is especially dire in northern Canada. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ottawa to meet with Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Discussions are set to include support for Ukraine, human rights in Iran, and the North American refugee policy. Ms. Joly says Washington and Ottawa want to deepen ties ahead of major summits next month by the G20 and Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forums. Mr. Blinken's two-day visit ends in Montreal. This is where he will visit a lithium recycling plant, and talks will focus on trade and electric vehicles. All right, moving to the public inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki sent the Ontario Provincial Police a text message a week after anti-COVID-19 mandate protesters arrived in Ottawa. This was to say that the federal government was losing or had already lost confidence in the local police force. OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick testified today. An inquiry lawyer read the text messages exchanged between Mr. Carrick and Ms. Lucki, which suggested that she was having a hard time trying to calm down federal cabinet ministers who were seeing bouncing castles in downtown Ottawa. Parliament's budget officer is blaming delays and inflation for the billions of dollars being added to the cost of building a new fleet of warships. In a report, Budget Officer Yves Giroux estimates that the government will pay more than $84 billion for 15 new Royal Canadian Navy warships. He says the government is aware that the 2017 budget is no longer adequate. There are mounting concerns within the government about the state of the Navy's current fleet. This with the first new vessel expected to be delivered in the early 2030s. All right, turning to a new survey which finds small business confidence nosedived in October. It found retail businesses were being the least optimistic, even despite heading into the holiday shopping season. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says its three-month Business Barometer Index dropped 3 points this month to 46.4, which is the lowest since early in the pandemic. It says a third of Canadian small business owners now say rising interest rates are causing difficulties. Now, this is up from about a fifth at the start of the year. Saskatchewan kicked off its fall legislative session with a tough-on-crime throne speech. It was presented while a former cabinet minister turned notorious convicted killer sat in the chamber. 84-year-old Colin Thatcher says he was happy to accept an invitation from his good friend, Saskatchewan Party legislature member Lyle Stewart. The MLA later apologized for his invitation, saying it was an error in judgment. The throne speech itself focused on cracking down on crime. It also laid out the government's plans for the Saskatchewan First Act. The bill would define that the province has exclusive jurisdiction over its natural resources and economic future. While on the West Coast, BC's incoming Premier David Eby says he's going to try to bring in legislation on key issues like housing, healthcare, and public safety as soon as he is sworn in. Mr. Eby has been asked by Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin to begin the process of forming government. This comes as he transitions into his new role while a legislative session is underway. The unusual situation was created by last week's disqualification of his lone challenger to replace outgoing NDP leader and Premier John Horgan. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs has its first woman leader in its nearly 35-year history. Chiefs in the province chose Kathy Merrick yesterday as the advocacy group's next Grand Chief. 7 candidates were vying for the position during the by-election. This was after the organization removed previous leader Arlen Dumas over sexual harassment allegations. Ms. Merrick is a former chief of Pima Chicama Cree Nation. She says she will work hard for small communities and she will focus on improving health care for First Nations people. All right, up next, we have a look at positivity and investing from Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. So stay tuned. We will be right back after a short break. The Bank of Canada has raised its key interest rate for the sixth consecutive time, bringing it to 3.75%. Governor Tiff Macklem is making it clear that more rate hikes are coming as inflation stays hot. But he says the central bank is, quote, getting closer to the end of this tightening phase. However, we're not there yet. BMO chief economist Douglas Porter said he still expects the Bank of Canada to take its key interest rate above 4%. As more interest rates loom over Canadians already facing inflation, it may be hard to stay positive amid these times. But some argue that there's always a way. Well, joining us now to share his point of view is Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Always great to be here.
Now, there seems to be a lot of negativity out there, Brendan, and reasonably so given what we're facing right now. But is it all bad news when it comes to investors in particular?
In particular, I would say no, because for all the bad news that's out there, unless there's some other weird thing that we hadn't anticipated, or at least we thought was unlikely but possible, I don't want to enumerate them, but for all the bad news that's out there, all of it seems to be in the market right now, and the market isn't doing too badly. It's had a couple of strong days this week. It's sort of flat to middling today, but it's not all bad, even though interest rates are going up, even though that war in Iraq, the war in Ukraine, I got to get my invective right. My war in Ukraine is still going on. The world has absorbed all the bad news and kept on going, inflation and all of it. So I don't think it's necessarily all negative for investors or anyone else for that matter.
Yeah, that's good to hear, Brendan. Now, in terms of these rate hikes, the sixth consecutive rate hike by the Bank of Canada, how do you expect this to impact investors and Canadians?
Well, I think Canadians as a whole, the cost of everything is going up. And when they raise interest rates, the Bank of Canada and the banks, it does make the cost of borrowing, it makes the cost of everything higher, but that's the intent. The idea is to make everything more expensive and therefore slow down the economy. But the immediate effect of raising interest rates by making everything more expensive is, in a world where everything's getting more expensive, and that's what inflation means, the effect of raising interest rates is to actually accelerate inflation until it doesn't. What the Bank of Canada, I think, is saying is that perhaps they're close to have done enough. I'm not sure about that. They do not want to see another stagflation world where we have interest rates and inflation rates in the double digits, and yet the world isn't growing, at least not in real terms, or at least the economy is not growing in real terms. So I think they will be tending to be more aggressive. And actually, this is the most aggressive the bank has been, I think, ever. Raising the interest rate, the Bank of Canada rate 50 basis points was actually less than what people had expected. But even raising a 50 basis points is unusual in a historical context.
Now, there's another thing to consider, especially in October, considering that investors get anxious due to something called the October effect. So what exactly is the October effect, Brendan, and should we be worried about it?
No is the answer to the second question. The answer to the first question is just the two historic market crashes. Believe it or not, I'm only old enough to remember one of them. The crash of 29 is beyond my range. I've only read about it, but I was sentient somewhat, as much as a 17-year-old can be, in 87. Those two big crashes, 29 and 87, were in the month of October. But they were kind of earlier in the month. I think if we were going to have a crash in October, we would have had it already. So the flip side of it is sell in May and go away. So that the 6 months between May and October tend to be the worst. The market does tend to get better just seasonally, historically, from this point onward. So no, I don't think investors need to be worried from a seasonal perspective.
All right, Brendan, looks like we've got about a minute left here, but some may consider tax loss selling at this time. So what are your thoughts on that, Brendan?
If you're going to sell stocks for tax reasons, so you've owned a stock at $100, it was a tech stock, it's now at $25, which is like a lot of them. But you really like the company, and yet you want to take the tax losses. First and foremost, do anything for tax reasons, it usually bites you. But if you're going to do something for tax reasons, I do it now, and then you have a chance this year to look at buying it back. Because I do think the stocks that have been hit hard, there's going to be a number of investors saying, yeah, I got to get this off the sheets for optical reasons, tax reasons, whatever reason between now and the end of the year. So I think while the market may continue to do well, the stocks that have been hit the hardest may get another knockdown between now and the end of the year. But the flip side of that is from January onward, I think the market as a whole and these stocks that have been knocked down may have a bigger than expected rally.
All right, Brendan, always great advice. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Nima.
We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. Welcome back. Up now, we have Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing North American equity markets mixed today. It's a bit of an interesting picture. The Dow's up by over 300 points, the TSX up by about 0.6%. But you are seeing a little bit of pressure on the S&P 500 and also quite significant pressure in the tech-heavy NASDAQ. We'll get to that in just a second. Of course, the big news here in Canada this week has been the Bank of Canada raising rates by 50 basis points to 3.75%. It's the sixth time in a row that they've been raising rates. It was, however, a little bit less than the economists were expecting, which was 75 basis points. This has actually been supportive for risk on assets, the equity markets here in Canada, because it's a little bit less than expected. In other words, the BOC is turning a little bit more dovish, indicating that the tightening cycle might actually be closer to the end. Right now, they're saying that the terminal rate is probably going to be around 4 to 4.25%. Now, of course, immediately following this, we did have the big banks raise their rate to the consumer to 5.95%, just so you know where you're at in terms of your mortgage, credit cards, and any type of loans that you're looking at. 5.95% is where the banks currently stand. The BOC also did downgrade their growth outlook for this year to 3.25%. They took down next year to 0.9%. So again, slower growth going forward, and down to 2% in 2024. They also, of course, lowered their global growth outlook as well. Now, away from that, as we look at the TSX, as I mentioned, it is higher today. Most sectors are higher. Tech is leading the way, with Shopify leading those gains, following better than expected earnings results, specifically on the revenue front. And the company management also reiterated their guidance for the fiscal year. We're also keeping our eyes, of course, on the price of WTI. It's up by 1.5% today. So a nice bounce back in the price of crude, really following a stronger U.S. GDP print than expected. Why would that factor into WTI? Because we've seen the price of oil decline out of concern that we are seeing demand destruction because of concerns surrounding a recession or slower economy. That GDP print gave life to the price of WTI. People are still out there using their cars and flying places and spending. So we are seeing WTI help the energy sector here in Canada. Away from that, we're also seeing the Canadian dollar slightly higher versus the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar actually, interestingly, did hit a one-month low yesterday. In terms of corporate earnings here in Canada, we're taking a look at tech. They did come in with better than expected results. They are selling their energy business in Fort Hill to Suncor for $1 billion. That stock's trading lower. CP, the railway company, of course, had an inline quarter. Revenue was better than expected at $2.3 billion for 3 months. And they also indicated that they are seeing strong demand and that they've got the capacity to fill that demand. We're also seeing West Fraser Timber higher on the day to the tune of about 1.2, 1.3%, following a big earnings beat. And Shaw stock has also been moving higher following comments yesterday from the minister with optimism surrounding the Shaw-Rogers deal going through. Competition Bureau, of course, says they're going to continue to take a serious look at this, but nonetheless, stock moving higher. Cameco also had better than expected results. Shifting our focus now to the United States and what we're seeing there, again, a little bit of a mixed picture. The Dow up over 300 points, but the Nasdaq under pressure. The big story in the United States right now are the very disappointing results out of Facebook, or Meta as it is known, specifically on the expense side, the operating expense ratio, very much disappointed investors. And investors are very concerned that they are just spending too much money. Their core business seems to be strong, but a lot of money is being spent on Meta, the universe, and AI. Away from that, of course, we are seeing the value stocks and the reopening trades doing very well in the United States. So think machinery, energy, airlines, rails, and restaurants, all performing quite well. And in fact, the leading stocks within the United States, and this is why the Dow is stronger versus the S&P, because these are Dow heavyweight components, Caterpillar, Honeywell, Comcast, CMSCA, all performing very well in the day. Now, of course, what we're going to be focused on next will be what we do hear from the U.S. Federal Reserve. There are indications from various Federal Reserve presidents that perhaps the U.S. Federal Reserve is tightening too aggressively. We actually have heard of those comments this week. And I had a guest on today for my program on Sunday. I encourage you to watch it. He goes through the specific comments from the various Fed presidents. And this is really important because it is supportive for equities in your portfolio if they slow down the tightening. I'll leave it there, Nima. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. Stay with us. More news from around the world is up next. Ukrainian forces are attacking the southern city of Kherson, loosening Russia's grip on the region, while fighting also intensifies in the country's east. Moscow-appointed authorities have abandoned the city. They joined the tens of thousands of residents who have fled to other Russian-held areas. Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued a statement painting the conflict in Ukraine as part of efforts by the West to secure global domination. Well, it seems interest rate hikes aren't unique to North America. The European Central Bank has announced another outsized interest rate hike. The bank is aiming to quash out-of-control inflation. The adjustment saw the bank raise its interest rate benchmarks by 0.75 of a percentage point. Now, this matches its record increase from last month. Economists are worried about the pace the central bank is moving at, this with fears of a recession looming overhead for all of Europe and the Americas. All right, well, meanwhile, Europe's energy crisis is forcing some people to turn to cheaper sources to stay warm as the weather gets colder. After Russia slashed natural gas flows to Europe amid its war against Ukraine, demand for wood is surging in poorer nations. These include Moldova and Kosovo, as well as in the richer nations of Western and Central Europe. It's led to higher prices, growing concerns about theft, and even scams. Some German foresters are putting GPS devices into logs to track the valuable stocks and deter theft. Well, this comes as a new report says the global energy crisis triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine is causing profound and long-lasting changes. It says they have the potential to hasten the transition to a more sustainable and secure energy system. The Paris-based International Energy Agency says for the first time ever, it found that global demand for every fossil fuel will be exhibiting a peak or plateau in the next few decades. The report says reversing the centuries-old rise of fossil fuel use will be a pivotal moment in energy history. All right, moving to Iran now, where the supreme leader and its president are trying to link an Islamic State-claimed gun attack on a famous mosque on the countrywide protests roiling the nation. The attack killed 15 people, and the attempted blame comes as Iran's theocracy has been unable to contain the demonstrations. The protests were sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini after her detention by the country's morality police. They've grown with anger over Iran's cratered economy and theocracy. This with over 200 people killed amid a crackdown in Iran and thousands more arrested by police. The European Union has moved to tighten laws around guns. The EU is trying to reel in the trade and transport of guns to help keep illicit firearms out of the hands of criminal gangs. The move comes as concerns grow about the war in Ukraine and how it might increase the spread of illegal weapons. The EU's executive branch, the European Commission, estimates that around 35 million illegal weapons are in the hands of civilians across the 27-nation bloc. Turning to China now, which has reportedly established dozens of overseas police stations in nations around the world. Now, this is part of Beijing's crackdown on corruption. Activists fear such outposts could be used to track and harass dissidents. The Dutch government said this week it was looking into media reports that 2 such stations were established in the Netherlands. The reports underscore concerns about the ruling Chinese Communist Party's influence over its citizens abroad, which are sometimes in ways deemed illegal by other countries. Some good news in Uganda, where the Ebola outbreak is under control, according to a top public health official in Africa on Thursday. The acting director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention noted that the local health authorities are doing well in tracing most contacts. He says about 98% of over 2,600 documented contacts are being monitored. Tracing contacts is key to stemming the spread of contagious diseases like Ebola. A Washington state judge has fined Facebook parent company Meta nearly $25 million. Now, this is for repeated willful violations of campaign finance disclosure laws. Washington's transparency law requires ad sellers such as Meta to disclose the names and addresses of those who buy political ads, the target of such ads, and the number of views that each get. Meta has objected to the requirements. Looks like Elon Musk is still going forward in his bid to buy Twitter. Mr. Musk is telling Twitter advertisers that he's buying the platform to, quote, help humanity. So we'll keep an eye on that. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.